The wind howled like a wounded animal as Lucas Ortega urged his horse through the blinding white curtain of snow, cursing himself for riding out this late in the day when any fool could see a blizzard brewing. He'd been checking his trap lines in the mountains east of Hawthorne, Nevada, and the storm had come down faster than a rattlesnake strike, catching him miles from his cabin with nothing but his thick coat and the growing certainty that he might freeze to death before morning. It was December 1882, and this was shaping up to be one of the worst winters the territory had seen in years. Lucas was about to turn his mare toward what he hoped was the direction of town when he saw something that made his heart skip. A dark shape lay half buried in the snow near a cluster of pine trees, and at first he thought it was a fallen log or maybe a deer carcass. But something made him ride closer, some instinct that wouldn't let him pass by, and when he got near enough to see clearly through the swirling snow, his breath caught in his chest. It was a woman, lying face down in a snowbank. Her dark hair spread around her head like a fan, her body so still she might have been dead already. He was off his horse before he'd fully processed what he was seeing, his boots sinking deep into the powder as he rushed to her side. Lucas dropped to his knees and carefully turned her over, his hands shaking from more than just the cold. She was young, maybe early 20s, with delicate features and skin that had gone frighteningly pale. Her lips were blue and her eyelashes were crusted with ice. He pressed his fingers to her throat, searching for a pulse, and felt a surge of relief when he found one, faint and thready but there. "Come on, lady," he muttered, lifting her into his arms. She weighed next to nothing, and he could feel how cold she was even through his thick gloves. "Don't you die on me now." Getting her onto his horse took some doing, especially with the wind trying to knock them both over, but Lucas managed to drape her across the saddle in front of him, holding her tight against his chest as he kicked the mare into motion. His cabin was closer than town, maybe 2 miles northwest if he hadn't lost his bearings completely in the storm. He'd been living out here alone for the past 3 years, ever since he'd left Texas with blood on his hands and ghosts in his wake. The isolation suited him. Or at least it had until this moment, when he had another person's life depending on him and no doctor within shouting distance. The ride felt like it took hours, though it was probably closer to 30 minutes. By the time Lucas spotted the dark shape of his cabin through the snow, his arms were aching from holding the woman, and his face felt like it had been scrubbed raw with sandpaper. He practically fell off the horse, dragging her with him, and kicked the door open with more force than necessary. Inside, the cabin was blessedly warm. He'd banked the fire before leaving that morning, and the coals were still glowing red in the stone hearth. Lucas laid the woman on the floor near the fireplace and quickly added wood to the flames, building them up until heat began to flood the small room. Then he turned his attention back to her. Her clothes were soaked through and partially frozen, which meant they had to come off if she was going to have any chance of surviving. Lucas hesitated for only a moment before his practical side took over. This wasn't about propriety. This was about life and death. He worked quickly, peeling away her wet coat, her dress, her undergarments, trying not to notice the smooth curve of her shoulders or the way her dark hair clung to her neck. When she was naked, he wrapped her in every blanket he owned and positioned her as close to the fire as was safe, then set about making hot water. For the next several hours, Lucas did everything he could think of to warm her. He heated stones in the fire and wrapped them in cloth to place around her body. He made weak tea and coaxed it between her lips a few drops at a time, tilting her head back and massaging her throat to make her swallow. He chafed her hands and feet, trying to restore circulation, watching for any sign of frostbite. And through it all, she remained unconscious, barely breathing, hovering in that gray space between life and death. As night fell and the storm continued to rage outside, Lucas found himself talking to her, even though he knew she couldn't hear him. He told her about his horse, about the trap lines, about the way the mountains looked in summer when the wildflowers bloomed. He told her stupid jokes and hummed half-remembered songs from his childhood. Anything to fill the silence, to convince himself she was going to make it. It was well past midnight when her eyelids finally fluttered. Lucas, who'd been dozing in his chair with his chin on his chest, jerked awake at the small sound she made. He was at her side in an instant, one hand on her forehead, the other reaching for the cup of water he'd kept warming by the fire. "Easy now," he said softly as her eyes opened. They were a striking shade of green, he noticed, even clouded with confusion as they were. "You're safe. You're in my cabin. I found you in the snow." She stared at him for a long moment, her lips moving but no sound coming out. Lucas held the cup to her mouth and let her take a few small sips. When she'd had enough, she turned her head away and closed her eyes again, but this time it was natural sleep, not unconsciousness. Her breathing had evened out and color was starting to return to her cheeks. Lucas allowed himself to relax slightly. She was going to live. He didn't know who she was or what she'd been doing out in a blizzard, but she was going to live, and that was all that mattered right now. He must have fallen asleep again, because the next thing he knew, pale winter sunlight was streaming through the cabin's single window, and someone was watching him. Lucas opened his eyes to find the woman sitting up, wrapped in his blankets, her green eyes fixed on his face with an intensity that made him shift in his chair. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his voice rough from sleep. "Cold," she whispered. "And confused. Who are you?" "Name's Lucas Ortega. I found you yesterday evening, half frozen in a snowbank about 2 miles from here. Do you remember what happened?" She frowned, pulling the blankets tighter around herself. "I remember my horse throwing me. There was something, a mountain lion maybe, and shadow spooked. I hit my head when I fell." Her hand went to her temple, and Lucas noticed a nasty bruise there that he hadn't spotted in the dim firelight last night. "I tried to walk, but I got turned around in the snow. Everything after that is just white." "You're lucky to be alive," Lucas said bluntly. "Another hour and you'd have frozen to death. Then I owe you my life." She met his eyes, and there was something in her gaze that made his chest tighten. "Thank you. Don't mention it. Any decent person would have done the same." He stood up, suddenly uncomfortable with the gratitude in her voice. "I should warn you, your clothes were wet. I had to take them off to warm you up. They're drying now." He gestured to where her things hung near the fire, trying not to let his discomfort show on his face. To his surprise, she didn't look scandalized. "I understand. Like you said, it was life or death." She glanced around the cabin, taking in the sparse furnishings, the rifle mounted over the door, the shelf of books in the corner. "Do you live out here alone?" "Yeah, have for 3 years now." "That must be lonely." Lucas shrugged. "I like the quiet." It was a lie, but one he'd told himself so many times he almost believed it. "What's your name? And what were you doing riding alone in winter, Willow Vaughn?" she said. "I was traveling from California to Carson City to stay with my aunt. I hired a guide in Hawthorne, but he turned out to be more interested in my money than getting me to my destination. When I refused his advances, he took off with my belongings and left me stranded. I tried to make it back to town on my own, but clearly I made a mess of it." Anger flared hot in Lucas's chest. "He left you out there to die. Did you get his name?" He called himself Jack Sherman, but I doubt that was real. "Probably not." Lucas ran a hand through his dark hair, thinking. "The storm's passed, but there's at least 2 feet of snow on the ground. It'll take a day or two for the roads to clear enough for travel. You're welcome to stay here until then." I don't want to impose. You're not imposing. Besides, you shouldn't be riding anywhere for a few days anyway, not with that head wound. He moved toward the stove, needing something to do with his hands. I'll make breakfast. You need to eat, build your strength back up. Over the next few days, an odd domesticity settled over the cabin. Willow's strength returned quickly, and she insisted on helping with chores despite Lucas's protests. He found himself watching her as she moved around his space, mending a tear in his shirt with thread from her saddlebag, stirring a pot of stew, reading one of his books by the fire. She had a quick mind and a sharp sense of humor that caught him off guard more than once, making him laugh in a way he hadn't in years. On the third evening, as they sat across from each other at his small table eating dinner, Willow said, "Tell me about yourself, Lucas Ortega." "What brings a man to live alone in the Nevada mountains?" Lucas's jaw tightened. "Not much to tell. I'm a trapper. I sell furs in town once a month and keep to myself the rest of the time." "That's what you do?" I asked who you are. "It's the same thing." "No, it's not." She leaned forward, her green eyes searching his face. "You have books on that shelf that most frontier trappers have never heard of. You speak like an educated man when you forget to hide it, and you have the saddest eyes I've ever seen. So I'll ask again, what brings you out here?" For a long moment, Lucas considered shutting her down, giving her the cold shoulder until she dropped it. But something in her gaze, some understanding, made the walls he'd built around himself crack just a little. "I killed a man back in Texas," he said flatly. 3 years ago. He deserved it. He'd murdered my younger brother over a poker game, shot him in the back like a coward. I tracked him down and put a bullet in his heart. The law saw it different than I did, so I ran. Been running ever since. He expected horror, disgust, maybe fear. Instead, Willow just nodded slowly. "Did killing him bring your brother back?" "No." "Did it make you feel better?" "For about 5 minutes. And then," Lucas looked away, staring into the fire, "and then I felt empty, like I'd carved out something important and couldn't figure out how to fill the space it left behind." "That's guilt," Willow said softly. "Not for killing him, I'd wager, but for not being able to save your brother in the first place." Her words hit him like a physical blow. Lucas felt his throat tighten, and he had to blink hard against the sudden burning in his eyes. "What do you know about it?" "More than you'd think." She reached across the table and placed her hand over his. Her touch was warm, gentle, and it made something in his chest ache. "I lost my parents 2 years ago. Cholera. I was in San Francisco at the time, visiting friends. By the time I got the telegram and made it back to Sacramento, they'd already been buried for a week. I spent months afterward thinking of all the things I should have done differently. If I'd been there, maybe I could have nursed them. Maybe they'd still be alive. That's different. You couldn't have known. And you couldn't have stopped a man from shooting your brother in the back when you weren't even there." She squeezed his hand. "We torture ourselves with things we can't change, Lucas. That's what guilt does. It keeps us locked in the past, unable to move forward." "How do you move forward?" The question came out rougher than he intended, almost desperate. "I'm still figuring that out," Willow admitted. "But I think it starts with forgiving yourself, and maybe letting other people in instead of hiding away from the world." They sat in silence for a while, hands still touching across the table. Lucas couldn't remember the last time someone had touched him with kindness, without fear or expectation. It felt strange. It felt terrifying. It felt like coming home after years of wandering in the dark. "Why were you really going to Carson City?" he asked eventually. "The truth this time." Willow smiled slightly. "The truth is my aunt wrote to me after my parents died and suggested I come stay with her, start fresh somewhere new. I've been teaching piano in San Francisco, but the city feels suffocating sometimes. All those people, all that noise, and yet somehow I'm lonelier there than I ever was in Sacramento. I thought maybe in Nevada, in a smaller town, I might find something real, something that matters. And instead you nearly froze to death. Yes, well, life rarely goes according to plan. She pulled her hand back, and Lucas immediately missed the warmth of it. The roads should be clear enough tomorrow for me to make it back to Hawthorne. I can catch a stage from there to Carson City. Right. Yes, of course. Lucas stood abruptly, suddenly restless. I'll ride with you, make sure you get there safely. You don't have to do that. I know. But that guide who abandoned you might still be in town, and I'd like to have a word with him. The truth was more complicated. The truth was that Lucas couldn't stand the thought of watching her ride away and never seeing her again, of returning to this cabin alone with nothing but his guilt and his memories for company. In 3 short days, Willow Vaughn had reminded him what it felt like to be human, to connect with another person, to care about something beyond mere survival. And even though he knew letting her go was the smart thing, the safe thing, every instinct he had was screaming at him to hold on. They left at first light the next morning, both mounted on Lucas's mare since Willow's horse was long gone. She sat in front of him, her back pressed against his chest, and Lucas tried not to think about how perfectly she fit there, how right it felt to have his arms around her as they navigated the snow-covered trail. The ride to Hawthorne took most of the morning, and when the town finally came into view, Lucas felt his stomach sink. This was it. She'd thank him, maybe shake his hand, and then she'd disappear from his life as suddenly as she'd entered it. But as they rode down the main street, Willow suddenly stiffened in his arms. "That's him," she hissed, pointing to a man lounging outside the saloon. "That's Jack Sherman." Lucas's vision went red. He dismounted in one fluid motion and stalked toward the man, his hand hovering near his gun. Sherman was in his 40s, overweight and slovenly, with mean eyes and a cruel twist to his mouth. He looked up as Lucas approached, his expression shifting from bored to nervous. "You Jack Sherman?" Lucas asked, his voice deadly quiet. "Who's asking?" Lucas grabbed him by the front of his shirt and hauled him to his feet. "I'm the man who found the woman you left to die in the mountains. I'm the man who spent 3 days nursing her back to health because some coward decided stealing was easier than honest work." Sherman's face went pale. "Now hold on. I don't know what she told you, but shut up." Lucas shoved him against the wall hard enough to rattle his teeth. "You're going to give back every cent you stole from her, and then you're going to apologize. And if I ever hear of you guiding anyone again, I'll hunt you down and make you wish you'd frozen to death in those mountains. Are we clear, Crystal?" Sherman wheezed. True to his word, Sherman produced Willow's money from his saddlebags, along with the rest of her belongings he'd kept. He stammered out an apology that was only half sincere, but Lucas figured it was better than nothing. When it was done, he returned to where Willow waited, handing her the recovered items. "Your things, madam," he said with a slight bow. "My hero," she said, but there was something in her voice that wasn't quite teasing. "Thank you, Lucas, for everything. Like I said, any decent person would have done the same. We both know that's not true." She looked at him for a long moment, her green eyes searching his face. "What will you do now? Go back to your cabin?" That was the plan, and go back to being alone, to punishing yourself for something that wasn't your fault. Lucas felt his defenses rising. "Willow, come with me to Carson City," she said suddenly. "Or don't, stay in Hawthorne. Just don't go back to that cabin and disappear from the world again. You have so much to offer, Lucas, so much kindness and strength and goodness. Don't waste it hiding in the mountains." "I don't think you understand what I am," he said roughly. "I'm a wanted man. I killed someone. Eventually, that's going to catch up with me. Then let it catch up with you while you're actually living instead of just existing. She stepped closer, close enough that he could smell the soap she'd used that morning. "I'm not asking you to marry me. I'm just asking you to take a chance. Come to Carson City. See where things go. If it doesn't work out, you can always go back to trapping." Every rational part of Lucas's brain was screaming at him to say no, to walk away, to protect her from the mess his life had become. But as he looked into Willow's eyes, he realized something profound. He'd been dead inside for 3 years, and she'd somehow brought him back to life. She'd taken the frozen, broken parts of him and thawed them out with her warmth and her understanding and her refusal to let him hide behind his guilt. Maybe that was what it meant to save someone's soul. Not with grand gestures or divine intervention, but with simple human connection. With seeing someone clearly and refusing to look away. "Okay," he heard himself say, "I'll come with you." The smile that broke across Willow's face was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. She threw her arms around his neck and Lucas caught her, holding her tight, breathing in the scent of her hair. Over her shoulder, he could see people on the street watching them with curiosity, but he didn't care. For the first time in 3 years, he felt something other than emptiness. He felt hope. They spent that night at Hawthorne's modest boarding house, in separate rooms, though Lucas lay awake for hours knowing she was just on the other side of the wall. In the morning, they caught the stage to Carson City, a 2-day journey that took them through some of the most beautiful country Lucas had ever seen. The mountains were stark and white with snow, but there was a terrible beauty to them, a reminder that even the harshest landscapes could be survived with the right companion. Willow's aunt, Margaret Sutton, lived in a neat Victorian house on the edge of Carson City. She was a widow in her 50s with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, and Lucas could tell immediately that she was taking his measure and finding him wanting. "So you're the trapper who saved my niece," Margaret said as she showed them into her parlor. "Willow's told me all about you in her telegram." "I hope not all," Lucas muttered, earning a small smile from Willow. "She said you were a good man who'd lost his way. She also said she intended to keep you around, which is rather forward if you ask me, but Willow always was headstrong." Margaret fixed him with a penetrating stare. "What are your intentions toward my niece, Mr. Ortega?" "Aunt Margaret," Willow's cheeks flushed red. "It's a fair question," Lucas said. He met Margaret's gaze steadily. "My intentions are to get to know her better, madam. Beyond that, I can't say. My life is complicated right now." "Well, at least you're honest," Margaret sniffed. "You can stay in the guest room while you figure out your complications, but I expect you to find proper work and conduct yourself respectably under my roof. No sneaking around in the middle of the night." "Yes, madam. And Lucas," Margaret's expression softened slightly, "Willow's had a hard couple of years. She deserves happiness. If you can't give her that, have the decency to leave before you break her heart." "I understand." Finding work in Carson City turned out to be easier than Lucas expected. The town was growing rapidly, fueled by the nearby silver mines, and there was always need for men willing to do hard labor. He took a job at a lumber mill on the edge of town, spending his days cutting and hauling timber, coming home exhausted but satisfied in a way he hadn't felt in years. In the evenings, he'd sit with Willow in Margaret's parlor, talking about everything and nothing. She told him about her childhood in Sacramento, her love of music, her dreams of one day opening a music school where children from all backgrounds could learn to play. He told her about growing up in Texas, about his brother Daniel, about the good memories before everything went wrong. Slowly, piece by piece, they built a foundation of trust and understanding. It was 6 weeks before Lucas kissed her for the first time. They were walking back from a church social, the winter night clear and cold, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds. Willow was laughing at something he'd said, her breath making small clouds in the frigid air, and Lucas thought he'd never seen anything more beautiful in his life. He stopped walking, caught her hand, pulled her gently toward him. "Willow," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I need to kiss you. Tell me if that's not okay." Instead of answering, she rose up on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, both of them learning the shape and taste of each other. But then, Willow made a small sound in the back of her throat and threaded her fingers through his hair, and the kiss deepened into something hungry, almost desperate. Lucas pulled her closer, his hands spanning her waist, pouring 3 years of loneliness and longing into the contact. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "I'm falling in love with you," he said. "I think I started falling the moment you opened your eyes in my cabin." "Good," Willow whispered, "because I'm falling in love with you too." "You're not the only one who needed saving, Lucas. I was drowning in grief and loneliness, going through the motions but not really living. And then I found you, or you found me. Either way, you reminded me what it feels like to be alive. So we saved each other. I think maybe we did." They stood there in the cold for a long time, holding each other, neither wanting to break the spell. Eventually, though, practical considerations intruded, and they walked the rest of the way to Margaret's house hand in hand. Spring came to Nevada with a rush of wildflowers and warm winds, and with it came a visitor Lucas had been half expecting, half dreading. He was walking home from the mill one April evening when he spotted a man in a sheriff's badge standing outside Margaret's house, talking to Willow on the porch. Lucas's first instinct was to run, but he forced himself to keep walking. He was done running. "Lucas Ortega?" the sheriff asked as he approached. "That's me. I'm Sheriff Wade Harrison from Amarillo, Texas. I've been looking for you for 3 years now." The sheriff's hand rested on his gun, but he hadn't drawn it yet. "You're wanted for the murder of Clayton Burke." "I know." Lucas looked at Willow, saw the fear in her eyes, and tried to give her a reassuring smile. "Are you here to arrest me?" "That depends." Sheriff Harrison studied him carefully. "I've been tracking Clayton Burke for 5 years before you killed him. He was wanted in 3 states for robbery and murder. When I heard you'd shot him, I looked into it, talked to witnesses, reviewed the evidence. Your brother's killing was the 8th murder Burke committed. He was a rabid dog who needed putting down." Lucas felt his heart start to pound. "Then why track me?" "Because I needed to know what kind of man you were. Whether you were another killer who needed to be locked up or a decent person who'd been pushed too far." The sheriff glanced at Willow, then back at Lucas. "I've spent the past 2 months in Carson City watching you, asking questions. From what I can tell, you're about as honest as they come. You work hard, you treat people right, and you're clearly in love with this young lady here." "What are you saying?" Willow asked, her voice trembling. "I'm saying the warrant for Lucas Ortega's arrest got lost in my files somewhere, probably fell into a fire. These things happen." Sheriff Harrison extended his hand. "Go live your life, son. You've paid enough for doing what needed doing." Lucas shook the offered hand, too overcome with emotion to speak. After the sheriff left, Willow threw herself into his arms, crying and laughing at the same time. "You're free," she said. "Lucas, you're free." "Yeah." He held her tight, his own eyes wet. "I'm free." That night, Lucas asked Willow to marry him. They were sitting in Margaret's garden, surrounded by blooming roses, and he'd never been more certain of anything in his life. He didn't have a ring, didn't have much of anything really, but what he had was his heart, and he offered it to her completely. "Yes," Willow said, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "Yes, absolutely yes." They were married in June of 1883 in a simple ceremony at the Carson City Church, with Margaret and a few friends from town in attendance. Willow wore a dress of pale blue silk that made her eyes shine like gemstones, and Lucas wore his best suit, feeling awkward but happier than he'd ever imagined possible. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Lucas kissed her with a tenderness that made Margaret dab at her eyes with a handkerchief. They spent their wedding night in a hotel room overlooking the mountains, and Lucas made love to his wife with a reverence that bordered on worship. Every touch, every kiss was a promise that he would cherish her, protect her, love her for all the days of his life. Willow responded with equal passion, showing him without words that she understood, that she felt the same, that they were bound together now in a way that went beyond legal contracts or social conventions. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the sheets, Lucas tracing idle patterns on Willow's bare shoulder while she rested her head on his chest. "Tell me what you're thinking," she murmured. "I'm thinking about how close I came to riding past you that night," Lucas said honestly. "If I'd been 100 yards further south, if I'd decided to turn back 5 minutes earlier, I never would have found you, and my whole life would be different. Do you believe in fate? I didn't used to. But now I think maybe some things are meant to be. Maybe you were meant to end up in that snowbank, and I was meant to find you, and everything that came before was just leading us to each other. I like that thought." Willow tilted her head up to kiss his jaw, "though I could have done without the near-death experience." "Fair point." Lucas smiled and pulled her closer. "I love you, Mrs. Ortega." "I love you too, Mr. Ortega, now and always." They stayed in Carson City for 2 more years, building a life together. Lucas continued working at the lumber mill and eventually saved enough to buy a small piece of land on the outskirts of town. With help from friends, he built a house there. Nothing fancy but solid and warm, with a room Willow could use for giving music lessons. She quickly built up a roster of students, children from both wealthy and working-class families, charging on a sliding scale so that anyone who wanted to learn could afford it. In the spring of 1885, Willow told Lucas she was pregnant. He'd been fixing a broken fence post when she came running out of the house, her face flushed with excitement, and at first he thought something was wrong. But when she grabbed his hands and placed them on her still flat stomach, understanding dawned. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice cracking. "I'm sure. The doctor confirmed it this morning. We're going to have a baby, Lucas." He picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing like children, and then he set her down very carefully, as if she were made of glass. "Are you feeling okay? Do you need to sit down? Should you be running around like that?" "I'm pregnant, not fragile," Willow said, but she was smiling. "Though I wouldn't mind sitting for a bit. Come inside and let me tell you all about what the doctor said." The pregnancy was mostly easy, though Willow had some difficult weeks at the beginning where she couldn't keep food down. Lucas fussed over her like a mother hen, making her rest when she wanted to work, cooking bland meals that wouldn't upset her stomach, reading to her in the evenings. Margaret visited frequently, offering advice and support, and despite her initial reservations about Lucas, the older woman had grown to love him like a son. Their baby was born on a snowy December night, exactly 3 years after Lucas had found Willow in the mountains. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Lucas thought he might lose his mind from fear and helplessness. But Willow was strong, stronger than he'd ever given her credit for, and when the doctor finally placed a squalling, red-faced infant in her arms, Lucas felt his heart expand in ways he hadn't known were possible. "It's a boy," the doctor announced with a smile. "A healthy baby boy." Lucas looked at his son, at this tiny perfect creature that he and Willow had created together, and felt tears streaming down his face. "He's beautiful," he whispered. "Willow, he's so beautiful." "He looks like you," Willow said softly, exhausted but glowing. "He has your eyes." They named him Daniel, after Lucas's brother. It felt right, like a way of honoring the past while embracing the future. Little Daniel was a good baby, quick to smile and slow to fuss, and Lucas discovered that fatherhood suited him in ways he never expected. He loved the weight of his son in his arms, the milky smell of him, the way Daniel's tiny hand would grip his finger with surprising strength. As Daniel grew from baby to toddler, Lucas watched in amazement as his son developed his own personality. The boy was curious and fearless, always getting into things, exploring every corner of their property. He had Willow's laugh and Lucas's stubborn streak, and he adored his mother's piano, banging on the keys with chubby fists while Willow patiently taught him simple melodies. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Lucas took on more responsibility at the mill and was eventually promoted to foreman. Willow's music school grew, and she began giving concerts at the church, her playing drawing people from all over the county. They made friends in town, attended barn dances and church socials, hosted dinners at their house. It was a simple life, but it was full of love and laughter and meaning. When Daniel was 3, Willow became pregnant again. This time she knew what to expect, and the pregnancy seemed easier somehow. Or maybe Lucas was just less frantic. Their daughter was born on a warm May evening in 1889, coming into the world with barely a whimper, her eyes wide and curious as she looked around the room. "Another beautiful child," Lucas said, cradling her gently. "What should we name her?" "Rose," Willow said immediately, "after my mother." "Rose Ortega." Lucas tested the name and smiled. "It's perfect." Rose was quieter than her brother had been, more contemplative but no less loved. Daniel was fascinated by his baby sister, always wanting to hold her and show her his toys. Lucas would watch them together and marvel at the family he'd somehow been blessed with. This loud, chaotic, wonderful collection of people who filled his days with purpose. Margaret passed away peacefully in her sleep when Rose was 2 years old. They found her in her bed with a book open on her lap, looking for all the world like she'd simply drifted off while reading. Willow grieved deeply for her aunt, the woman who'd taken her in and given her a new start, but she took comfort in knowing that Margaret had lived to see her happily married with 2 beautiful grandchildren to spoil. The years rolled on, each one bringing new challenges and joys. Daniel started school and proved to be a bright student with a particular aptitude for mathematics. Rose followed in her mother's footsteps, showing an early talent for music that made Willow's eyes shine with pride. Lucas expanded his business interests, partnering with another man to open a second lumber mill, then investing in a small ranch where they raised cattle and horses. By 1895, when Lucas was 41 and Willow was 38, they'd built something truly remarkable. Their house had been expanded twice to accommodate their growing family and Willow's increasing number of students. Daniel, now 10, talked about becoming an engineer and building bridges across the great western rivers. Rose, 7, spent hours at the piano, her small fingers flying over the keys with a grace that belied her age. One evening in late summer, after the children were asleep, Lucas and Willow sat on their porch watching the sun set behind the mountains. Lucas had his arm around his wife's shoulders and she was leaning into him, comfortable and content. "You ever think about that night?" Willow asked softly. "When you found me in the snow, sometimes," Lucas admitted. "Though it feels like it happened to different people. I was so lost back then, so angry and empty. And now I'm home." He kissed the top of her head. "You saved me, Willow. You saw something worth saving when I couldn't see it myself, and you refused to let me go back to just existing. You gave me a reason to live again." "You saved yourself," Willow corrected gently. "I just held up a mirror so you could see what I saw. A good man who'd made one mistake and was letting it define his entire life. A man capable of great love and kindness if he'd just forgive himself and move forward. We saved each other then. We did. She turned to look at him, her green eyes reflecting the dying light. I was drowning in grief, going through life like a ghost. And then you appeared, this gruff trapper who was trying so hard to seem tough while being incredibly gentle. You gave me hope again, purpose, love. Lucas cupped her face in his hands, studying the familiar, beloved features. There were lines now that hadn't been there 13 years ago, strands of silver in her dark hair, but to him, she was more beautiful than ever. I love you, Willow Ortega. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. I love you too, Lucas. Always and forever. They kissed as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. From inside the house, they could hear Daniel helping Rose with her reading practice, their young voices rising and falling in a familiar cadence. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled and Lucas's old mare whinnied in response from the barn. It was a perfect moment, the kind that Lucas knew he'd remember for the rest of his life. Not because anything extraordinary was happening, but because everything was exactly as it should be. He had a family who loved him, meaningful work, a community he belonged to. He had a past he'd made peace with and a future he was excited to meet. Most importantly, he had Willow. His partner, his love, his salvation. The woman who'd literally frozen nearly to death so that they could find each other, so that he could learn what it meant to truly live instead of just survive. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Lucas pulled Willow closer and sent up a silent prayer of gratitude. For second chances, for mercy, for love. For a woman who'd saved his soul simply by seeing it was worth saving. For a life he'd never imagined he deserved, but was determined to honor every single day. The years continued to pass in Carson City, bringing with them the inevitable changes that come with time. Daniel grew into a tall, serious young man who did indeed pursue engineering, attending a technical college in San Francisco with money his parents had carefully saved. He wrote home faithfully every week, filling his letters with excitement about his studies and life in the city. Rose continued to blossom as a musician, and by the time she was 15, she was giving her own concerts and teaching students alongside her mother. Lucas's lumber business thrived, providing security for his family and employment for dozens of men in the area. He developed a reputation for being fair and honest, treating his workers well and always keeping his word. The ranch had grown too, with prime cattle that fetched good prices at market and horses that were sought after throughout the territory. But success and stability didn't make Lucas complacent. He'd learned through hard experience that life could change in an instant, that everything you loved could be taken away if you didn't hold it close. So he made sure to tell Willow he loved her every single day. He attended every one of Rose's recitals, sat front row center and clapped until his hands hurt. He traveled to San Francisco twice a year to visit Daniel, taking his son to restaurants and museums, listening to his dreams for the future. In 1902, Daniel graduated from college and took a position with a railroad company, designing bridges and trestles that would carry trains across the rugged western landscape. Lucas attended the graduation ceremony with Willow and Rose, his chest nearly bursting with pride as his son walked across the stage to receive his diploma. Afterward, they had dinner at a fancy restaurant, and Daniel raised his glass in a toast. "To my parents," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "who taught me that you can overcome anything if you have love and determination, who showed me every day what it means to be a good person. I wouldn't be here without you." Lucas had to look away, blinking hard against the tears that threatened to fall. Willow squeezed his hand under the table, and he squeezed back, overwhelmed with love for his family. Rose followed a different path. She fell in love with a young doctor who'd moved to Carson City to open a practice, a kind man named Thomas Wright, who appreciated her talent and spirit. Lucas liked Thomas immediately, recognizing in the young doctor the same devotion he felt for Willow. When Thomas asked for permission to marry Rose, Lucas gave it gladly, though not without a stern warning about treating his daughter right. The wedding in the spring of 1903 was beautiful. Rose wore Willow's wedding dress, altered to fit her slimmer frame, and she played a piece she'd composed herself as part of the ceremony. Lucas walked her down the aisle with tears in his eyes, thinking about the tiny baby she'd been, the curious child, the talented young woman she'd become. When he placed her hand in Thomas's, he whispered, "Take care of her." "With my life," Thomas promised, and Lucas believed him. Daniel married a few years later, a smart young woman named Alina who worked as a teacher in Sacramento. They settled in San Francisco, where Daniel's career was taking off, and soon presented Lucas and Willow with their first grandchild, a boy they named Lucas James after his grandfather. When Lucas held his grandson for the first time, feeling the weight of the tiny body in his arms, he was transported back to that December night when Daniel had been born, and he marveled at how life moved in circles. Rose and Thomas gave them 2 more grandchildren in quick succession, twin girls who were as rambunctious and spirited as their mother had been. Suddenly, the house that had felt quiet after the children moved out was full of noise and laughter again, at least when the grandchildren visited. And Lucas found he loved being a grandfather almost as much as he'd loved being a father. As the new century progressed, bringing with it automobiles and telephones and other modern wonders, Lucas sometimes felt like he'd lived through several different lifetimes. There was the angry, grief-stricken young man who'd killed a man in Texas and run away. The isolated trapper hiding in the mountains, punishing himself for sins real and imagined. The man who'd found a half-frozen woman in a snowbank and discovered his own humanity in the act of saving her. The husband, father, businessman, grandfather he'd become. But through all those iterations, one thing remained constant: Willow. She was his anchor, his compass, his home. They'd been married for nearly 30 years now, and Lucas loved her more with each passing day. He loved the silver in her hair and the lines around her eyes. He loved the way she hummed while cooking and still fell asleep reading books in bed. He loved her strength, her compassion, her unwavering belief in the goodness of people. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1913, Lucas surprised Willow with a trip back to the mountains where they'd met. They rode on horseback, just the two of them, following the trails he remembered from his trapping days. The cabin was still standing, though the roof needed repairs and the door hung crooked on its hinges. They spent the afternoon there, walking through the space that had once been Lucas's entire world. "It seems so small now," Willow said, looking around at the single room. "How did you stand living here alone?" "I didn't know any better," Lucas said. "I thought isolation was what I deserved. I thought pushing everyone away was somehow honorable, like I was protecting the world from myself. And now I know that isolation isn't noble, it's just lonely." He took her hands in his. "You taught me that, Willow. You taught me that connection is what makes life worth living. That love isn't a weakness but the greatest strength we have." "You taught me some things too," Willow said softly. "You taught me that grief doesn't have to define you, that you can lose everything and still build a beautiful life, that taking risks on people is always worth it." They made love in the old cabin that afternoon, on a blanket spread over the rough wooden floor. their bodies moving together with the ease of 30 years of practice. Afterward, they lay entwined, listening to the wind whisper through the pines, and Lucas thought about all the moments that had led them here. The coincidences and choices, the tragedy and triumph, the million small decisions that had woven their lives together into something greater than either of them could have created alone. As evening approached and it was time to head back to town, Lucas took one last look at the cabin. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" Willow asked. "For being lost. For falling off your horse and getting turned around in the snow. For ending up in exactly the right place at exactly the right time." He pulled her close. "For saving my life by letting me save yours. Oh, Lucas." Willow rested her head against his chest. "Don't you know by now? We saved each other. That's what love does. It rescues us from ourselves and gives us something bigger to believe in." They rode back to Carson City as the sun set, both of them quieter than usual, lost in their own thoughts. But it was a comfortable silence, the kind that only comes after decades of truly knowing another person. Lucas thought about the journey that had brought them to this point, the unlikely path from a snowbank in the mountains to this life they'd built together, and he felt nothing but gratitude. The years that followed were gentler than those that had come before. Lucas and Willow settled into the rhythms of older age, content to tend their garden, spoil their grandchildren, and enjoy the peace they'd earned. They attended church on Sundays, hosted family dinners that were loud and chaotic and perfect, and took long walks in the evenings, still holding hands like newlyweds. In 1918, the world was gripped by war and influenza, but Carson City was largely spared the worst of both. Their family remained safe and healthy, though Lucas and Willow did what they could to help those less fortunate, donating money and supplies, opening their home to those who needed shelter. It was important to them that their grandchildren understand the value of compassion, of reaching out to others even when times were hard. Daniel's career had taken him to impressive heights. He designed bridges across the Colorado River and into the Sierra Nevada, structures that would stand for generations. He visited Carson City several times a year, bringing Alina and their 3 children, and Lucas loved hearing his son talk about his work with such passion and expertise. This was the legacy he and Willow had created. Children who were confident and capable, who contributed to the world, who knew they were loved. Rose and Thomas's medical practice had become one of the most respected in Carson City. Thomas was known for his skill and Rose for her kindness to patients, often playing piano in the waiting room to calm nervous children. Their twin daughters were in their teens now, bright and beautiful and full of life. They called Lucas Grandpa Bear because of the fierce hugs he gave, and he pretended to be embarrassed by the nickname while secretly loving it. In 1920, Willow became ill. It started as a cough that wouldn't go away, then progressed to fevers and weakness. Thomas examined her and his face grew grave. Pneumonia, he said, and at her age it was serious. Lucas barely left her bedside for 2 weeks, holding her hand, reading to her, telling her stories about their life together. He reminded her of that first night in the cabin, how stubborn she'd been even while barely conscious. He talked about their wedding day, Daniel's birth, Rose's first piano recital, every precious memory they'd accumulated over nearly 4 decades together. "You can't leave me," he told her one night when her breathing was particularly labored. "I won't allow it. You saved my soul, Willow Ortega. You don't get to take it with you." Willow opened her eyes, managing a weak smile. "Bossy," she whispered. "Absolutely. Now stop dying and get better. We have grandchildren to spoil and gardens to tend, and at least another 20 years of holding hands on the porch. 20 years, at minimum. You always did aim high." She squeezed his hand, her grip worryingly weak. "I love you, Lucas. Everything we built, everything we created, it was all worth it. If I died tomorrow, I'd die happy knowing I spent my life with you." "You're not dying tomorrow or any time soon," Lucas said fiercely. "Do you hear me? I found you in a snowbank, and I refuse to lose you to anything less dramatic than that." Willow actually laughed, though it turned into a coughing fit that alarmed them both. But after that night, she began to slowly improve. The fever broke, her breathing eased, and color returned to her cheeks. Thomas was amazed, saying he'd seen younger patients succumb to less severe cases. But Lucas knew the truth. Willow was too stubborn to die. She was too full of love and life and purpose. And maybe, just maybe, she wasn't done saving him yet. Her recovery took months, and she was never quite as strong as she'd been before. But by summer, she was back to giving piano lessons and tending her roses, moving a bit slower but no less determined. Lucas hovered over her like an anxious mother hen, earning exasperated looks from both Willow and Rose, but he didn't care. He'd come too close to losing her, and he wasn't taking any chances. As the decade progressed, Lucas and Willow stepped back from most of their business and teaching responsibilities, passing control to younger hands. Daniel took over management of the lumber mills, bringing modern efficiency while maintaining his father's principles of fair treatment. Rose transformed her mother's music school into something more formal, establishing a proper academy with multiple teachers and a concert hall. Lucas and Willow were content to be advisors, enjoying the fruits of their labor without the stress of daily management. They spent their days quietly, reading and gardening and enjoying each other's company. They took short trips to visit their children and grandchildren, traveled to San Francisco to see Daniel's latest bridge project, attended Rose's recitals in Carson City's new opera house. They celebrated birthdays and anniversaries and holidays surrounded by the family they'd created, and Lucas never took a single moment for granted. On December 15th, 1925, Lucas woke before dawn to find Willow already awake, staring out the window at the falling snow. He rolled over and wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured. "Today is the anniversary," Willow said softly. 43 years ago today you found me in that snowbank." Lucas kissed her shoulder. "Best day of my life." "Mine too, though I don't remember most of it." She turned in his arms to face him. "We've had a good life, haven't we, Lucas? The best. Do you ever regret leaving Texas, giving up your old life?" "Not even for a second. That wasn't living, Willow, that was just existing. What we have here, this is living." He traced the lines of her face with gentle fingers. "I regret the years I wasted being angry and alone, but I don't regret a single moment since I found you." "We're getting old," Willow observed. "We are, and we're lucky to be doing it together." They lay in bed for a while longer, watching the snow fall outside their window, comfortable in the silence. Eventually they got up and went about their morning routine, the familiar dance of a long marriage. Lucas made coffee while Willow started breakfast. They ate together at the kitchen table, discussing their plans for the day. Rose was bringing the twins by later, and they wanted to make sure they had cookies baked and hot chocolate ready. It was an ordinary day, unremarkable in almost every way. But as Lucas watched Willow move around their kitchen, humming softly to herself, he felt overwhelmed with love and gratitude. This was what they'd built from that desperate night in the snow. A life filled with ordinary moments that were somehow extraordinary in their very ordinariness. Morning coffee and grandchildren's visits, and the comfort of growing old beside someone who knew you completely and loved you anyway. That evening, after Rose and the twins had left, and the house was quiet again, Lucas and Willow bundled up and went outside to watch the snow fall. They stood on their porch, wrapped in blankets, watching the white flakes drift down from the dark sky. "I wonder sometimes," Willow said, "what would have happened if you'd ridden past me that night, if you'd been just a little further south or turned back a little sooner." "I'd have died alone in that cabin eventually," Lucas said honestly, "bitter and angry and convinced I deserved it, and I'd have frozen to death in the mountains, never knowing I could have had all this." She gestured at the house, the land, the life they'd built. "Never knowing you." "Fate," Lucas said. "It had to be fate. There's no other explanation for how perfectly wrong everything had to go to bring us together. You had to be abandoned by that guide. I had to be checking traps in a blizzard. The timing had to be exactly right or we'd have missed each other completely." "Then I'm grateful for fate," Willow said. "And I'm grateful for you, Lucas Ortega, for your kindness and your courage and your willingness to take a chance on a half-frozen stranger. I'm grateful for you too, Willow Ortega, for seeing something in me worth saving, for refusing to let me hide from life, for loving me even when I didn't think I deserved it." They kissed in the falling snow, just as they had 43 years ago in this same town, and Lucas felt the same flutter of excitement he'd felt as a young man. Some things never changed. Some loves never faded. They just grew deeper and richer with time, like good wine or well-worn leather. The years that followed were peaceful. Lucas and Willow continued their quiet life in Carson City, surrounded by family and friends. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in 1933 with a party that seemed to include half the town, and Lucas gave a toast that had everyone in tears. "50 years ago," he said, raising his glass, "I was a lost man, angry and isolated and convinced I was beyond redemption. And then I found a woman half frozen in a snowbank and everything changed. Willow didn't just let me save her life. She saved my soul. She taught me how to forgive myself, how to love again, how to build something meaningful from the ashes of tragedy. Every good thing in my life, every moment of joy and love and purpose, I owe to her. She is my heart, my home, my reason for being, and I will love her until my last breath and beyond." There wasn't a dry eye in the house when he finished. Willow stood up and kissed him, and their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren applauded, and Lucas thought his heart might burst from happiness. Lucas Ortega died peacefully in his sleep on a cold January night in 1936, just 3 weeks after his 82nd birthday. He went to bed after a normal day, kissed his wife goodnight like he had thousands of times before, and simply didn't wake up. Willow found him in the morning, still and cold but with a peaceful expression on his face, and she knew immediately that he was gone. The funeral was one of the largest Carson City had ever seen. People came from all over Nevada and beyond to pay their respects to the man who touched so many lives with his kindness and integrity. Daniel gave the eulogy, talking about his father's strength and gentleness, his work ethic and compassion. Rose played piano, a haunting melody that had everyone reaching for handkerchiefs, but it was Willow who told the true story of Lucas Ortega. Standing at his graveside, her voice strong despite her grief, she told them about a young man who'd been lost and found himself by helping someone else. About a trapper who'd rescued a stranger and discovered his own humanity in the process. About a husband and father who'd loved fiercely and lived honorably, who turned tragedy into triumph and built a legacy that would last generations. "He saved my life," Willow said, looking at the faces of her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. "But more than that, he saved my soul. He showed me what love looks like, what commitment means, what it is to choose someone every single day and build a life together. And I saved his soul too, or so he always told me. We rescued each other from loneliness and grief and gave each other purpose. That's what love does. It saves us from ourselves and gives us something bigger to believe in. Willow lived for another 3 years after Lucas died. They were quiet years, filled with memories and family visits and the peace that comes from a life well lived. She never remarried, never even considered it. Lucas had been her great love, her soulmate, and she was content to wait until they could be together again. She died in her sleep in the spring of 1939, in the same bed where Lucas had passed, surrounded by photographs of their life together. Rose found her in the morning with a smile on her face, and somehow everyone knew she'd found him again, wherever souls go when they leave this world. They buried her next to Lucas in the Carson City Cemetery, under a headstone that read, Willow Vaughn Ortega, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. She saved souls. And below that, together forever. The legacy of Lucas and Willow Ortega lived on through their descendants. Daniel's children became engineers and teachers, building bridges both literal and figurative. Rose's daughters became doctors and musicians, healing bodies and souls with equal skill. Their great-grandchildren spread across the country, carrying with them the values their great-grandparents had instilled. Compassion, integrity, the willingness to help others, the belief that love conquers all. And sometimes, on quiet winter nights in Carson City, when the snow falls soft and steady from a dark sky, people say you can see 2 figures standing on the porch of the old Ortega house, holding hands and watching the storm together. Just a trick of the light, probably, or imagination running wild. But those who believe in true love, in soulmates and second chances, and the power of one person to save another, they know better. They know it's Lucas and Willow, still together after all these years, still grateful for that desperate night when everything went wrong in exactly the right way. Still celebrating the moment, a cowboy found a woman unconscious in a snowbank, saved her life, and discovered she'd saved his soul. Still living proof that sometimes the greatest love stories begin with the simplest act of human kindness, and that the connections we forge with others are what give our lives meaning. Their story became part of Carson City's folklore, told and retold with varying degrees of accuracy, but always with the same message at its core, that we all have the power to save each other if we're willing to reach out, to take a risk, to believe that people are worth the effort. That loneliness and grief don't have to be permanent states, that it's never too late to choose love over isolation, connection over solitude, hope over despair. And on snowy December nights, when the wind howls through the mountains and the world feels cold and harsh, parents tell their children about Lucas and Willow Ortega, about the cowboy who found a dying woman and gave her warmth and shelter, about the woman who looked at a broken man and saw someone worth saving, about 2 lost souls who found each other in the wilderness and built a love that lasted beyond death itself. It's a story about rescue and redemption, about second chances and the transformative power of love. But mostly, it's a story about 2 ordinary people who did something extraordinary. They chose each other again and again, through decades of joys and sorrows, triumphs and trials. They built a life together one day at a time, one choice at a time, one act of love at a time. And in the end, that's what saved them both. Not a dramatic rescue in a snowstorm, though that's where it started. Not a single moment of heroism, though there were many. What saved Lucas and Willow was the daily decision to love each other, to forgive each other's flaws, to support each other's dreams, to build something lasting and beautiful together. The cowboy found her unconscious in a snowbank and saved her life. She saw the goodness in him that he'd forgotten existed and saved his soul. And together, they created a love story that proved sometimes the greatest adventures begin with the simplest act of human kindness. And the truest salvation comes from opening your heart to another person and choosing to build a life together, no matter what obstacles stand in your way. Their great-great-grandchildren still visit Carson City, still tend the graves in the cemetery, still tell the story to their own children. The lumber mills Daniel ran have long since closed, replaced by modern industry. The music academy Rose founded continues to teach new generations of students. The house Lucas built with his own hands still stands on the edge of town, though it's been renovated and expanded over the years. But the essence of what Lucas and Willow created remains, in the values passed down through generations, in the belief that every person deserves compassion and second chances, in the understanding that love is the greatest force for good in the world, capable of transforming lives and healing even the deepest wounds. The cowboy and the woman he rescued from a snowbank lived and loved and built something that outlasted them both. Their story continues to inspire, to remind people that heroes don't always wear badges or carry guns. Sometimes they're just ordinary people who do the right thing at the right moment, who reach out to help a stranger and discover they've saved themselves in the process. And that's the real magic of their story. Not that Lucas saved Willow from freezing to death, though he did. Not that Willow helped Lucas heal from guilt and grief, though she did. The magic is in what happened after, in the everyday choice to love and be loved, to build and create and nurture, to turn a chance encounter in a blizzard into a lifetime of devotion. Lucas and Willow Ortega proved that salvation comes in many forms. Sometimes it's warmth when you're freezing, shelter when you're lost, kindness when you're alone. And sometimes it's the steady, enduring love of another person who sees you clearly and chooses you anyway, who believes in your potential even when you've given up on yourself, who stands beside you through every storm and helps you build a life worth living. That's the legacy they left behind. Not wealth or fame or monuments, but a simple truth that resonates through generations. We save each other. With compassion and courage, with love and commitment, with the willingness to take risks on people who might seem broken or lost. We save each other, and in doing so, we save ourselves. The cowboy found her unconscious in a snowbank. He saved her life, and she saved his soul. And together, they lived happily ever after, proving that fairy tales can come true even in the harsh reality of the Wild West, and that true love is worth waiting for, worth fighting for, worth building a life around. Their story ends not with death but with legacy, with love that transcends time, with the knowledge that what they created together will continue to touch lives long after they're gone. And really, what more could anyone ask for than that?